The halls of the obsidian palace were silent, but for the echo of Lysandra's footsteps. The torches flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. She walked slowly, her heart heavy, and her head bowed. Once, she had been the Alpha King's chosen Omega, the one promised to bear the heir of the kingdom. Now, she was nothing but whispers in the court, a shadow of failure. The courtiers avoided her gaze, some out of fear, some out of disgust. She had failed them all. She had failed Kaelin. Her mind replayed that day endlessly. The grand ceremony, the promise she could not keep, the cold, unreadable look in Kaelin's eyes when he told her she was rejected. The words had been like ice, cutting deeper than any blade. Rejection is not the end, her handmaid had whispered that night, but the silence of the palace spoke differently. Every corner seemed to remember her shame. Lysandra had tried to flee the court, to hide in the empty chambers high above the city, but the walls held her in. She could not escape the past. Kaelin, the Alpha King, was feared across the lands. His power was unmatched, and his gaze could silence a room with a single glance. Yet, there had always been something more in his eyes when they met hers, something that had drawn her in, even when she had been too afraid to see it. But that connection had ended the day he rejected her. Now, she was nothing. As she reached the throne room, she hesitated. The great doors loomed before her, carved with the history of centuries. She had never entered willingly, since the day of her rejection. But today, an urgent summons had arrived, a scroll sealed with the Alpha's mark. Trembling, she lifted the doors and stepped inside. The room was vast, its walls adorned with banners of kings long gone. Kaelin sat upon his throne, his presence as commanding as ever. He did not rise, nor did he speak immediately. His eyes, sharp and dark, measured her with the weight of judgment and expectation. The court had gathered, filling the chamber with silence, so thick it felt like a living thing. Every noble present leaned forward, waiting. Lysandra's knees felt weak, yet she forced herself to stand tall. She could not show fear, though it burned inside her. Kaelin's voice finally broke the silence. It was calm, controlled, but with an edge that made every word tremble with authority. "Lysandra," he said, "come closer." She obeyed, moving forward slowly, her gown whispering against the marble floor. Each step felt like walking across a bridge stretched over a chasm of past failures. Kaelin's gaze followed her, unreadable. "The court has seen your inability to fulfill the role you were chosen for. They have whispered of your weakness. Yet, here you stand." He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the carved arms of the throne. "I do not ask for weakness. I ask for the kingdom's future. Give me my heir." I cooled. The words hit her like a thunderclap. The court fell silent, their breaths caught as if the very air had been stolen. Lysandra's mind raced. He cannot mean it. He rejected me. How can he demand this now? Kaelin's voice softened, just enough to make her pulse quicken. "Do not mistake my command for mercy, Lysandra. I offer neither. I offer the future for the kingdom, for the throne, and perhaps for ourselves." She struggled to find her voice. "Your Highness, I failed once. How can you ask this of me now?" His eyes, dark as midnight, held a storm within them. "Because the kingdom will fall if I do not. And because I see in you something beyond failure. You are stronger than you believe. Do not let the court's whispers define you." Lysandra's chest tightened. Part of her wanted to flee, to disappear into the shadows of the palace, and never face him again. But another part, a part she had tried to deny, stirred. It had not died in the months of exile, the months of whispered gossip. Something in Kaelin's command, in the intensity of his gaze, made her feel seen. "The court," she said softly. "They will never forgive me. They will never believe I can." Her voice faltered. Fear and hope warring within her. Kaelin rose from the throne. He was taller than she remembered, and in the torchlight, his presence seemed almost otherworldly. "Let them whisper," he said. "I am not asking for their forgiveness. I am asking for your courage." For a moment, the room seemed suspended in time. The courtiers held their breath, the only sound, the flicker of torches, and the distant wind through the palace windows. Lysandra realized that this was not just a summons for duty, it was a summons for something deeper, something neither of them had dared to acknowledge before. Kaelin stepped closer. The air between them seemed to hum with unspoken tension. "The kingdom needs an heir, Lysandra," he said, his voice softer now, almost intimate. "But I need to know that you will stand beside me. Not as a pawn, but as a partner. Can you do this?" Her heart raced, caught between fear and a dangerous, forbidden hope. She met his eyes and saw not only the weight of the crown but a flicker of something she had not seen before, a longing, a vulnerability buried beneath layers of pride and duty. She began. But no words came. She felt tears threaten to spill, not from sorrow, but from the intensity of the moment. For years, she had carried shame like a shroud. Now, she felt the possibility of redemption, and it terrified her. Kaelin's gaze softened, but the command remained. "Decide, Lysandra. Will you take your place beside me? Will you give me our heir and reclaim what was taken from both of us?" The court remained frozen, unable to breathe, unable to look away. Every eye was on the rejected Omega and the Alpha King who had once denied her. The tension was palpable, the kind that could shatter or forge destinies. Lysandra drew a deep breath, steadying her trembling hands. The weight of her past, the whispers of failure, the fear of the unknown, all of it pressed down on her. Yet, beneath it all, a fire sparked, a fire of defiance, of hope, and of something else she had long forgotten. Desire. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet carrying across the silent hall. "I will try." Kaelin's eyes darkened with a mix of relief and something more dangerous, something that neither of them fully understood. The court gasped softly, realizing the gravity of the moment. The rejected Omega had accepted the Alpha King's demand. A spark had ignited, one that could either save the kingdom or destroy them both. Kaelin returned to his throne, but his gaze never left her. "Then we begin," he said, his voice low and commanding. "The kingdom's future rests upon this choice. Do not fail me again, Lysandra, not for the court, not for the crown, but for yourself." Lysandra bowed deeply, a strange mixture of fear and determination swelling within her. For the first time in months, she felt alive, caught between shame and the possibility of redemption. The path ahead would be treacherous, filled with whispers, challenges, and the weight of destiny. But for the first time, she also felt a strange hope, and the undeniable pull of Kaelin's presence beside her. As she left the throne room, her mind raced with questions. Could she truly fulfill the impossible? Could she reclaim her place in the world, not just as the Alpha's Omega, but as a woman capable of shaping her own destiny? And beneath it all, a quiet, forbidden thought took root. Could there be more between them than duty, more than obligation? The torches flickered once more, shadows dancing across the palace walls. The court remained silent, unsure whether to fear or hope for what was to come. And in the heart of the obsidian palace, two souls bound by destiny, prepared to face a future neither fully understood. Hook, cliffhanger. Outside the palace, a black raven circled the towers, its eyes glowing faintly like embers. The whispering wind seemed to carry a warning. The path has begun, but darkness watches. Not all trials are of the heart. Some will come from shadows beyond this world. The moon hung low over the obsidian palace, spilling pale light across the gardens. The fountains whispered as water flowed, and the statues of forgotten kings seemed to watch with silent judgment. Lysandra wandered among the hedges, her mind heavy with the weight of Kaelin's command. The words echoed endlessly in her head. "Give me my heir." She had said yes, But the meaning of that yes was far from clear. She stopped beside a fountain, the silver water reflecting her own conflicted gaze. The past months had been a blur of shame and exile. Rejection had become her identity, but Kaylin's summons reminded her that she was still part of the kingdom's destiny. Still, she could not shake the fear that she was stepping into a path from which there was no return. The sound of footsteps on the marble path made her heart jump. Kaylin appeared, his dark cloak brushing the ground, his presence as commanding and magnetic as it had ever been. He did not smile, yet there was a softness in his eyes, a rare glimpse of vulnerability that few had ever seen. "You walk as if the shadows themselves follow you," he said, his voice low, carrying across the quiet garden. "They do," Lysandra admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I cannot forget what I failed to do, what I was." Kaylin approached, stopping a few steps from her. "You were never the failure," he said. "The failure was the curse upon this kingdom, the weight of the throne, and the impossible expectations placed upon us both." Lysandra looked at him, startled. Few had ever spoken to her with understanding, and fewer still had spoken like this. "You speak as if you know me," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. "But I am nothing. I am a shadow of what I should have been." Kaylin's gaze held hers, unflinching. "And yet, here you stand. You have survived. You have returned. That is more than most can claim. It is enough to begin again, if you are willing." The tension between them was palpable, like the quiet before a storm. Lysandra's heart raced, torn between fear and a strange, forbidden longing. She had spent months trying to convince herself that Kaylin was nothing to her now, but standing here, under the moon's cold light, she felt the pull she had once tried to deny. I do not know if I can," she confessed. "I do not know if I have the strength." Quote. Kaylin stepped closer, his shadow falling over her like a protective cloak. "You are stronger than you believe," he said, "and strength is not measured by success alone. It is measured by courage, by the willingness to face the impossible." Lysandra felt something shift inside her. She had always measured herself by failure, by the shame of the court's whispers. But Kaylin's words, sincere and commanding, gave her a fragile spark of hope. Perhaps she could try again, not as the Omega who failed, but as a woman who chose to reclaim her destiny. Kaylin extended a hand, the gesture both simple and profound. "Then let us make a pact," he said, "not as king and subject, but as two souls bound by fate. You will stand beside me, not as a pawn, but as a partner. And together, we will face what the curse demands." Lysandra hesitated. The idea of binding herself to Kaylin again, of stepping into a path fraught with danger and expectation, was terrifying. Yet, the offer also carried a promise, a chance to reclaim herself, to prove her worth, and perhaps to discover something she had longed for but never allowed herself to hope for. I agree," she said finally, placing her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a strange warmth spread through her, as if the shadows themselves had softened. Kaylin's grip was firm, steady, yet gentle, a balance of power and trust. "Good," he said. "The court will see us together. But this is not for their approval. This is for the kingdom, for the heir, and for the bond we share, whether we understand it now or later." For the first time in months, Lysandra felt a flicker of clarity. The path ahead would be dangerous, filled with scrutiny and the looming curse that had haunted Kaylin's family for generations, but she would not face it alone. Kaylin would stand beside her, not just as a king, but as someone who saw her, truly saw her, for the first time. In the following days, their alliance became a delicate dance. The palace was alive with whispers. Courtiers speculated endlessly, some hoping for scandal, others for a miracle. Lysandra navigated the halls with caution, her head held high despite the murmurs. Kaylin remained ever present, a silent guardian and sometimes a harsh teacher, guiding her through the complexities of her new role. One evening, Kaelin led her to a hidden chamber deep within the palace, a room filled with ancient texts, relics, and symbols that glowed faintly with magic. "This is where the heirs of our line have been prepared," he explained. "It is where you will begin your trials." Lysandra looked around, awe and fear mingling within her. The air shimmered with a quiet energy, as if the walls themselves remembered centuries of kings, queens, and Omega women like her. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "You must awaken what lies dormant within you," Kaelin said. "It is not only your body that must be ready. Your mind, your spirit, and your courage must align. The heir must be born of strength, not fear, and you must survive the trials that will come, trials of heart, of magic, and of will." Lysandra nodded, absorbing every word. The task seemed impossible, but Kaelin's presence gave her a strange comfort. She realized that this was not only about the kingdom or the curse, it was about reclaiming herself, about stepping out of the shadow of failure and into a destiny she had once feared she could never hold. As the days passed, Lysandra trained in the hidden chamber. She learned to focus her energy, to connect with the magic that flowed through the palace and the land. Kaelin was patient, sometimes stern, often quiet, but always present. They shared moments of silence, of unspoken understanding, that drew them closer in ways neither dared to acknowledge. One night, while practicing a ritual meant to strengthen her connection to the royal line, Lysandra faltered. Frustration and fear surged within her. "I cannot do this," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "I am not strong enough." Kaelin stepped beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Strength is not measured by perfection," he said softly. "It is measured by the courage to rise after every fall. You have fallen before, yes, but each step forward proves your strength." The words sank deep into her heart. She realized that the trials ahead were not meant to break her, but to shape her, to help her understand the power she carried, both as a woman and as Kaelin's chosen Omega. But even as they trained, shadows stirred in the court. A noble, envious of Kaelin's favor, began spreading rumors, questioning Lysandra's loyalty and her ability to fulfill her role. Whispers followed her through the halls, reminders of the world's harsh judgment. Kaelin, aware of the growing tension, did not react with anger at first. He watched, silent and calculating, waiting for the right moment to protect her and assert her place. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lysandra and Kaelin stood atop the palace balcony. The wind swept around them, carrying the scent of the city and the distant sea. Kaelin's gaze was fixed on the horizon, but his voice broke the quiet. "The court fears what it cannot control," he said, "but we are not here to seek their approval. We are here to protect the kingdom and fulfill the destiny that has been entrusted to us. You are part of that destiny, Lysandra. Never forget it." She looked at him, a mixture of awe and uncertainty in her eyes. "And if I fail again?" she asked. Kaelin's eyes softened. "Then we rise again, together." The words settled over her like a promise. For the first time, Lysandra felt that she was not alone. She had the king at her side, a man who demanded courage, but also offered trust. And in that trust, she found a spark of something more, the beginnings of understanding, respect, and a fragile, forbidden bond that neither of them could ignore. As they turned to leave the balcony, a shadow passed over the moon, and a black raven alighted on the highest tower. Its eyes glowed faintly, and the air around it shimmered with an unearthly energy. Lysandra felt a shiver run down her spine. Kaelin noticed it too, his gaze narrowing. "The darkness watches," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Our pact will not go unnoticed. Forces beyond this palace are aware of our actions. Be ready, Lysandra. The trials are only beginning." Her heart raced, a mix of fear and anticipation. She realized that stepping back into the world had brought more than whispers and judgment. It had awakened something older, something that would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine. Yet, despite the danger, Lysandra felt a strange exhilaration. For the first time in months, she had a purpose, a role, a chance to reclaim herself and, perhaps, to discover a bond that went beyond duty and expectation. The path ahead was dark, uncertain, and full of peril. But she was no longer the rejected Omega. She was a woman standing beside the Alpha King, ready to face whatever shadows awaited, and to find strength, courage, and perhaps something even more profound in the trials to come. Hook, cliffhanger. As the wind whispered through the palace towers, the raven took flight, and Lysandra felt a chill in her bones. Somewhere beyond the walls, a dark force stirred. The pact had been made, but the first true test of heart, courage, and destiny was coming, and it would change everything. The palace seemed alive in ways that both awed and unnerved Lysandra. The walls whispered of centuries past, of kings and queens who had shaped the fate of the kingdom, and of Omegas who had walked paths like hers. Every corridor, every flickering torch, carried a memory. The shadows themselves seemed to move with a quiet purpose, as if testing her resolve. Since forming the pact with Kaelin, Lysandra had begun her trials in earnest. The hidden chamber, filled with glowing relics and ancient texts, had become her sanctuary and crucible. Here, she learned to channel her strength, to focus her mind and body, and to connect with the magic that flowed through the royal line. Each day, Kaelin was there, a constant presence of power, patience, and command. It was not an easy process. Some rituals required endurance. Others demanded emotional clarity. Lysandra often struggled to master them. Once, a wave of fear had nearly overwhelmed her, and she had faltered in a simple ritual meant to awaken her connection to the royal bloodline. "You are allowing fear to rule you," Kaelin had said softly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You must face it, not run from it. Only then will you find the strength you seek." She had looked into his eyes, searching for judgment, but found none. Instead, there was an intensity that made her heart beat faster. A silent challenge intertwined with trust. Slowly, painfully, she learned to confront the fear that had defined her existence. Yet the trials were not only magical. The court's whispers grew louder each day. Rumors circulated, questioning Lysandra's loyalty and her ability to bear the heir. Every glance from the nobles felt like a blade. Every whispered word, a shadow pressing against her shoulders. Kaelin observed the court carefully, his patience as sharp as his anger could be. One evening, he cornered a noble who had been particularly cruel, his presence alone silencing the man. "Do not test her," Kaelin said, his voice low and dangerous. "Lysandra is part of this kingdom's future, and I will not allow anyone to endanger that." The court fell silent, realizing that their intrigue had awakened the king's wrath. Lysandra, standing behind him, felt a mixture of fear and reassurance. The court may judge her, but Kaelin stood as her shield, not only as king but as someone who recognized her value. Amid the tension, moments of quiet intimacy began to emerge between Kaelin and Lysandra. In the empty corridors or the moonlit gardens, they shared brief exchanges, a hand brushing against hers, a gaze lingering too long, a word of encouragement in the quiet of the night. The air between them was charged, a mixture of respect, longing, and unspoken emotion. One night, Lysandra found herself practicing a particularly difficult ritual in the hidden chamber. The magic of the palace seemed alive, swirling around her in golden threads of light. She struggled to focus, her energy scattering like sparks in the wind. Kaelin entered silently, watching her struggle. "You are trying to control it with fear," he said. "Let it flow through you. Trust yourself, and trust me." Her pulse quickened as he stepped closer. The heat of his presence, the intensity of his gaze, stirred something deep within her. She took a shaky breath and allowed herself to surrender, not to him, but to the moment, to the power, and to the possibility that she could rise above the shame and fear that had bound her for so long. The magic responded, flowing through her like a river, finally released from its dam. Light danced around the chamber, illuminating the carved walls and the relics that hummed with history. Lysandra felt a surge of triumph, a thrill unlike anything she had experienced before. "You did it," Kaelin said. his voice soft but carrying a weight that made her heart skip. "You are stronger than you know." Their eyes met, and for a brief instant, the world outside the chamber ceased to exist. The court, the palace, the whispers of the nobles, all were gone. There was only them, the trials, and the fragile bond that was growing between them. But even as they shared that moment, the court's betrayal was never far behind. The noble who had whispered lies now escalated his schemes. One morning, during a gathering in the great hall, he revealed Lysandra's past failure before the court. He painted it as deliberate treachery, suggesting that she had been unworthy from the beginning. The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to Lysandra. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her like a storm. Her hands trembled, her breath caught. And for a moment, she feared she would collapse under the scrutiny. Kalen rose from his throne, his presence filling the room. His dark eyes, sharp and commanding, cut through the whispers. "Silence," he commanded. The court obeyed immediately. Lysandra's past does not define her. Her courage does. Her trials do. And her loyalty has been proven time and again. He stepped down from the throne, moving toward her. Every courtier watched in awe and fear as he stood before her, his voice carrying authority and power. "You will not judge her," Kalen said, his words like iron. "You will not whisper lies. She stands for the future of this kingdom, and she does so with my trust. That is all you need to know." The court remained silent, and for the first time, Lysandra felt the tide shift. She was no longer merely the rejected Omega. She was a woman standing beside the Alpha King, acknowledged and protected. Despite this triumph, Lysandra knew that the trials were far from over. The curse that hung over the royal line still loomed, a shadow she could not yet see but could feel, pressing against the walls of the palace. She understood now that the magic she was learning, the courage she was cultivating, was not for the court alone. It was for something far greater, something that would test both her heart and her spirit. Kalen and Lysandra continued their work in secret chambers and moonlit gardens, each session strengthening both her magic and her confidence. Each trial brought moments of doubt, but also moments of connection. Their hands brushed during rituals. Their gazes lingered longer than necessary, and their words carried layers of meaning that neither fully admitted aloud. One evening, after a particularly exhausting trial, Lysandra collapsed onto a bench in the hidden garden, breathing hard. Kalen knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her back. "You pushed too hard," he said softly. "Even strength must rest, even courage must breathe." "I cannot fail," she whispered. "Not again. The kingdom, and you, depend on me." Kalen's expression softened. "You do not carry this burden alone. I am here. We are here. Together." She looked into his eyes and saw the weight he carried, not only the throne, but the fear of losing everything to the curse, to betrayal, to destiny. In that moment, she understood the depth of the bond forming between them. It was no longer just about duty or obligation. It was about trust, reliance, and a connection that neither could deny. But the palace, as always, had its shadows. In the night, whispers of dark magic began to stir. A mysterious symbol appeared in the royal gardens, glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. Lysandra sensed the presence of something ancient, something that had been awakened by their trials and their pact. Kalen observed the mark, his expression darkening. "The darkness watches," he said quietly. "The trials are not just of courage or heart. They are tests of power, of will, and of survival. We must be ready for what comes next." Lysandra felt a chill, the weight of the prophecy pressing on her shoulders. She had come far, but she knew that the path ahead would be more dangerous than anything she had faced before. Yet, despite the fear, a spark of determination burned brighter than ever. She would not run. She would not fail. Together, Kalen and Lysandra stood beneath the moonlight, the wind carrying the scent of the sea and the gardens. Their hands brushed again, a silent promise passing between them. Whatever trials awaited, they would face them side by side, hearts bound by duty, courage, and a deepening, undeniable connection. The first true test was coming. The shadows were gathering. And the kingdom, the heir, and their own hearts would all be forged in the fires of trials yet to come. Hook, cliffhanger. As the night deepened, a distant cry echoed from the palace gates. The raven from the towers appeared once more, its eyes glowing like embers. Lysandra felt the chill of destiny brushing against her soul. The trials are beginning, and not all shadows can be fought with courage alone. The palace was quiet, yet the air thrummed with a tension that could not be ignored. Lysandra stood at the edge of the royal balcony, the wind lifting her hair and carrying the scent of the distant sea. Below, the city slept, unaware of the storm gathering within the walls of the obsidian palace. She felt the weight of the trials she had endured, the whispers of the court, and the looming prophecy pressing down on her shoulders. Yet, unlike before, there was strength in her stance, a fire in her chest that had been forged through months of struggle and determination. Kalen appeared behind her, silent as the shadows. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, the warmth of his presence grounding her. "Tonight," he said quietly, "we face the final trial. Not for the court, not for the kingdom alone, but for the bond we have forged and the future that depends on it." Lysandra nodded, her heart pounding. She had faced doubt, whispers, and fear. She had endured magical rituals that tested her spirit and strength. But this trial was different. This was not only about proving herself to the kingdom, it was about facing the darkness that had always lingered at the edge of their fate. They moved together into the hidden chamber, where ancient relics glowed softly in the candlelight. The room, familiar yet charged with a new intensity, hummed with the energy of generations. Lysandra felt it in her bones. The magic was alive, aware, and waiting. Kalen approached the central altar, a carved stone imbued with ancient runes. "This is where the heir will be bound to the kingdom's destiny," he said. His voice, steady and commanding, carried a depth of emotion that few had ever witnessed. The trials are not just of magic or courage. They are of heart, of trust, and of will. You must give yourself fully, not as an obligation, but as a choice. Lysandra took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had chosen this path, not out of fear or duty alone, but because she understood her own strength and the bond she shared with Kalen. She had come far, and the woman she had been uncertain, shamed, and fragile no longer existed. The first challenge came in the form of shadows, dark and twisting, rising from the runes on the altar. They swirled around the chamber, testing her focus, whispering doubts into her mind. "You are weak, you cannot succeed, you are unworthy." The words clawed at her, echoing the whispers of the court that had haunted her for months. Lysandra closed her eyes and drew on the lessons she had learned. She drew a deep breath, feeling the energy of the palace, the power flowing through the royal line, and the unwavering presence of Kalen at her side. She spoke the incantations with clarity, letting her voice carry strength and determination. The shadows resisted, writhing and twisting, but she did not falter. Kalen stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, guiding her energy without words. The connection between them, forged in trials, whispered moments, and mutual trust, flowed like a river. Together, they channeled the magic, and the shadows recoiled, dissipating like smoke in the wind. "You are ready," Kalen said, his voice soft, yet filled with authority. "Now comes the true test of heart." The chamber grew still, and a light brighter than any torch filled the room. The air shimmered as the essence of the kingdom's future coalesced around them. Lysandra felt it, a pulse of life, fragile yet strong, waiting to be awakened. She understood then that the heir she would bear was more than a child. It was the embodiment of hope, courage, and the bond between her and Kalen. Kalen looked at her, his dark eyes softened by a depth of emotion rarely shown to the court. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Not because I demand it, but because you choose it." Lysandra met his gaze, unwavering. "I choose it," she said. "For the kingdom, for us, and for the life we can create together." The moment she spoke, a surge of magic enveloped the chamber. The runes glowed, the shadows vanished, and the air seemed to hum with energy. Lysandra felt a warmth spread through her, not just from the magic, but from the connection she shared with Kaelin. The trial was not about fear or obedience. It was about trust, courage, and the power of choice. As the energy settled, Lysandra and Kaelin stood together, their hands clasped, their hearts beating in unison. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the palace itself, as if acknowledging the completion of a cycle that had begun long before either of them was born. The court, summoned to witness the ritual's conclusion, entered in hushed awe. They had expected scandal, weakness, or failure. Instead, they saw Lysandra standing tall, radiant with confidence and power, and Kaelin beside her, a king transformed by trust and respect. Whispers of judgment were replaced by murmurs of astonishment. The rejected Omega had become the woman who would secure the kingdom's future. Kaelin addressed the court, his voice ringing with authority and reverence. The kingdom's destiny is no longer bound by fear or failure. It is bound by courage, trust, and the strength of those who choose to rise above the shadows. Lysandra has proven herself not only worthy of her role, but of our respect, our trust, and the future she will help create. The courtiers, some humbled and some fearful, bowed in acknowledgement. The whispers of doubt had been silenced, replaced by recognition of Lysandra's strength and the bond she shared with the Alpha King. Later, in the quiet of the royal chambers, Kaelin and Lysandra shared a moment of peace. The trials were over, but the future stretched before them, filled with possibilities and uncertainties. Yet, for the first time, the future felt like something they could face together. "You have changed," Kaelin said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not only because of the trials, but because of your courage, your heart, your strength." Lysandra smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the room. "And you," she replied, "have changed too. Not because of the throne, but because of the bond we share. I have seen the man behind the king, and it is a man who inspires me, challenges me, and makes me stronger." The words hung in the air, delicate yet profound. They did not need to speak of what had grown between them. It was clear in the warmth of their touch, the steadiness of their gaze, and the quiet rhythm of hearts aligned through trials and shared destiny. In the following weeks, Lysandra's strength and courage became evident to all. The rituals to awaken her connection to the royal line ensured that the heir would be born of not only lineage but purpose. The court, once filled with whispers of doubt, now watched in cautious respect. Allies and rivals alike understood that the woman they had once scorned was now a pillar of hope and power. The heir was conceived amidst a period of quiet devotion and shared purpose. It was a moment of triumph, not of spectacle, but of trust, love, and the fulfillment of destiny. Kaelin and Lysandra's bond had been tested by fear, whispers, and shadowed trials, yet it had emerged stronger, tempered by courage and mutual respect. Months passed, and the palace grew brighter with the knowledge that the kingdom's future was secure. The prophecy that had once seemed like a looming threat now felt like a promise fulfilled. Lysandra, once the rejected Omega, had reclaimed her place not as a tool of fate, but as a woman of power, courage, and choice. On a quiet evening, Lysandra and Kaelin stood together on the palace balcony, watching the city glow beneath them. The wind whispered through the towers, carrying the scent of the sea and the gardens. "We did it," Lysandra said softly, leaning against Kaelin. "No," Kaelin replied, his voice low but steady. "You did it. I only stood beside you." She looked up at him, a smile touching her lips. "Then we stand together, for the kingdom, for the heir, and for us." Kaelin's gaze softened, and he nodded. The trials had ended, but their journey together was only beginning. They had faced fear, betrayal, and shadows that threatened to undo them. Yet they had emerged stronger, bound by courage, trust, and a bond deeper than duty. The court had watched, the kingdom had waited, and destiny had been fulfilled. Yet, As the wind carried whispers through the palace towers, Lysandra felt a chill, a reminder that darkness, though defeated for now, always lingered at the edges. They had triumphed, yes, but the world beyond the palace walls would always hold challenges, trials, and shadows. Still, she was no longer afraid. She had strength, courage, and the Alpha King beside her. Together, they would face whatever came next, with hearts unbroken, wills unshaken, and a bond that no shadow could sever. Hook, cliffhanger ending. As Lysandra rested her head on Kaelin's shoulder, a distant cry echoed across the palace grounds. A black raven, its eyes glowing faintly, circled the highest tower. The prophecy had been fulfilled, the heir conceived. But Lysandra sensed that the kingdom's story was far from over. Shadows might rest, but they never truly sleep.